Dear learners, welcome back to WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we step into the world of a king whose decisions not only shaped his nation, but also left a legacy that transformed one of the world's greatest centers of learning, Oxford. This is the story of King Henry VIII, a monarch remembered for power, conflict, and change, yet also for founding Christ Church, one of Oxford's most iconic colleges. But this will not just be a tale of a king's rule. It is a journey through struggle and transformation, a story of bold choices, and a reminder that even in the storm of personal conflict, one can plant seeds of greatness that grow for centuries. As you listen, you will not only improve your English, but you will also walk alongside Henry, through the glory of his court, the shadows of his challenges, and the vision that led him to reshape the legacy of Oxford. This is not only history. It is about the human heart, ambition, resilience, and the search for meaning. And perhaps, it will make you reflect on your own path. If you would like to support our work, you are welcome to like, comment, share, or join us. Your support means a lot and helps us continue creating meaningful content for learners everywhere. So, get ready for a journey through power, conflict, and lasting legacy. Let us begin the story of King Henry VIII. The story of Henry VIII begins in a world of splendor and tension, where England stood at the edge of both greatness and uncertainty. Born on June 28, 1491, at Greenwich Palace, Henry was the second son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. His very birth carried deep symbolic meaning. It united two powerful houses, Lancaster and York, whose bitter conflict had once torn England apart in the Wars of the Roses. Henry's existence itself was proof that peace, at least for a time, had been restored. The England of Henry's childhood was different from the one he would later rule. His father, Henry VII, had fought hard to secure the throne and bring stability to a kingdom exhausted by civil war. The court was cautious, careful with money, and deeply focused on order. Young Henry, however, grew up surrounded not only by strict discipline but also by humanist learning, music, and the grand culture of the Renaissance that was spreading from Italy across Europe. From his earliest days, Henry was described as charming, athletic, and intelligent, a prince who seemed destined to shine. Yet destiny is often shaped by sudden changes. Henry was not supposed to be king. That role belonged to his elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. Arthur had been carefully trained to rule, while Henry's path was expected to be one of service to the church. But when Arthur died suddenly at the age of 15, everything shifted. In an instant, Henry became heir to the throne of England. A boy who had been prepared for prayer and study was now destined to wear the crown of a kingdom. The stage was set for a reign that would become one of the most dramatic in English history. The young prince, raised with ideals of chivalry, art, and devotion, would grow into a king who would face storms of faith, politics, and personal struggle. His reign would shake Europe, challenge the authority of the Pope, and leave behind both turmoil and triumph. And within this vast tale of battles and broken ties, there is also the quieter but enduring story of Oxford. For at the heart of Henry's reign was not only conflict, but creation, the founding of Christ Church, a symbol of learning, authority, and the king's lasting mark on England's intellectual life. Before we reach that point, let us follow the journey of Henry's early rule, as the young monarch begins to step into power, unaware of how deeply his choices would reshape his world. When Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, he was only 17 years old. The young king was tall, broad-shouldered, and admired across Europe for his athletic skill and radiant confidence. His court shone with music, tournaments, and pageantry. To many, Henry seemed the very image of a Renaissance prince, a ruler who would bring glory to England. But behind the golden surface, challenges quickly began to emerge. The most pressing issue was the question of succession. England, still haunted by memories of civil war, feared instability above all else. A strong dynasty was essential to keep the throne secure. Henry married Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his late brother Arthur, hoping to strengthen ties with Spain and secure heirs for the Tudor line. Their marriage was seen as both a political triumph and a symbol of stability. At first, the union appeared hopeful. Catherine was respected, wise, and deeply devoted. Yet, as the years passed, tragedy struck again and again. Catherine bore children, but most did not survive infancy. Only one daughter, Mary, lived. For Henry, who longed for a male heir to protect his dynasty, this was a heavy burden. Fear of dynastic collapse grew stronger with each passing year, and whispers of doubt began to circulate within the court. The challenge of succession was not Henry's only test. Across Europe, the great powers, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, competed for dominance. England was smaller and less wealthy than its rivals, but Henry's ambition was vast. He dreamed of victories like those of his ancestors, of leading England to military glory and continental respect. Wars were fought, alliances shifted, and the cost of ambition strained the kingdom's treasury. Then came a deeper conflict, one that would shape not only Henry's reign but also the soul of the nation. The power of the Catholic Church was immense, binding England spiritually and politically to Rome. Yet as Henry struggled with the absence of a male heir, he began to question whether his marriage to Catherine was truly lawful. He claimed that marrying his brother's widow went against divine law, and he sought an annulment from the Pope. But the Pope, entangled in European politics, refused. Spain, Catherine's homeland, was powerful and influential in Rome. Granting Henry's request would insult both Spain and the Church's authority. And so the young king, once a devoted son of the Church, found himself standing against the very institution that had shaped his childhood. This was Henry's emerging problem, a conflict between duty and desire, between the authority of the Pope and the authority of the crown. It was not only a personal struggle for a son, a husband, and a father. It was also the beginning of a national crisis. The question was no longer only about one man's marriage. It was about power, sovereignty, and the future of England itself. At this moment, Henry still stood at the edge of the storm. His charm and vigor inspired loyalty, but beneath the glittering surface of court life, the seeds of conflict had already been sown. The challenges of succession, faith, and ambition would soon grow into a tempest that would test his spirit, demand sacrifice, and push him toward decisions that would change history forever. The struggle that followed placed Henry VIII in the heart of a storm that blended the personal with the political. His longing for a male heir was not only the desire of a father but the fear of a king who remembered the chaos of England's past. Without a son, the Tudor dynasty stood on uncertain ground. And so, Henry's quest for an annulment from Catherine of Aragon became not just a private matter, but the central challenge of his reign. At first, Henry sought a solution through patience and diplomacy. He appealed to Rome, sending advisors, scholars, and ambassadors to argue his case before the Pope. Learned men in England debated scripture and canon law, searching for a justification to end the marriage. Henry himself, once praised as defender of the faith for writing against Martin Luther, now began to present himself as a man whose conscience demanded release from an unlawful union. But as the years dragged on, no solution came. Catherine remained steadfast, refusing to step aside, defending her honor with dignity and courage. The Pope, bound by political ties to Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V of Spain, could not grant Henry's request without igniting a diplomatic firestorm. For Henry, each year of waiting was not only a personal torment but also a reminder of the fragility of his dynasty. Frustration grew. And with frustration came the seed of rebellion against the old order. Around Europe, new ideas were spreading. The Protestant Reformation, ignited by Martin Luther in 1517, questioned the authority of the Pope and called for a return to Scripture as the foundation of faith. While Henry was no Protestant by conviction, the movement gave him a weapon. If Rome would not bend, perhaps England could break free. This was Henry's first great journey, the slow, painful realization that he could no longer rely on the Pope to solve his problem. He began to look inward, toward his own kingdom, his own authority, and his own conscience. Step by step, he started to build a new path. He promoted scholars who supported his cause, rewarded churchmen who argued for the king's supremacy, and silenced those who opposed him. The struggle was not only political but deeply human. Imagine the tension at court, divided loyalties, whispered rumors, the Queen's quiet resistance, and the King's growing impatience. Families, friendships, even faith itself were pulled apart as England's future hung in the balance. Henry's choice was becoming clear. If Rome refused to grant him freedom, he would have to claim it for himself. And so, the king who had once been Rome's loyal champion began to prepare for a break that would forever alter the course of history. Yet this journey was not without cost. Those who opposed Henry's desires faced dismissal, imprisonment, even death. Among them was Sir Thomas More, once Henry's trusted chancellor, who stood firm in loyalty to Rome and refused to swear to the king's supremacy. Their clash would echo through history as a battle of conscience, principle, and power. This was the first stage of Henry's transformation, from a young king full of charm and promise into a ruler hardened by conflict and necessity. The struggle for an heir was forcing him to redefine kingship itself. No longer would the Pope decide England's fate. That power, Henry believed, must rest in the crown. The journey had begun, but the decisive moment still lay ahead. Soon, Henry would have to make a choice that would tear apart centuries of tradition, set England on a new course of faith, and leave behind a legacy of both turmoil and creation. As we move forward, ask yourself, if you stood in Henry's place, torn between duty, desire, and faith, what path would you choose? The turning point came when Henry VIII decided to do what no English monarch before him had dared, to sever the bond between England and the authority of the Pope. This decision did not emerge overnight. It was the result of years of frustration, sleepless nights, and an unshakable belief that the destiny of his dynasty was worth any sacrifice. By the late 1520s, it was clear that Rome would never grant Henry his annulment. Catherine of Aragon, dignified and steadfast, refused to yield. She declared her marriage valid before God and the world. The Pope, under the political shadow of Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V, refused to rule against her. Henry's pleas had turned into dead ends, and the patience of a once youthful king had transformed into relentless determination. It was in this crucible that Henry made his defining choice. With the guidance of bold advisors such as Thomas Cromwell and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, Henry began to craft a new vision. England would no longer bow to Rome. Instead, the king himself would be the supreme head of the Church of England. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 declared that the Pope's authority in England was finished. The crown now stood not only as the head of state but also as the head of the Church. this was not just a legal reform. It was a spiritual and cultural earthquake. Monasteries that had stood for centuries were dissolved, their lands and treasures seized by the crown. Priests and nobles were forced to swear loyalty to the king's supremacy. Those who resisted were branded as traitors. Sir Thomas More, who had once been Henry's closest friend and chancellor, was executed for refusing to betray his conscience. In that moment, the personal had become political, and the political had become lethal. For Henry, this was both triumph and torment. He had gained what he wanted, freedom from Catherine, whom he set aside, and marriage to Anne Boleyn, the woman he believed would give him a son. Yet he also set into motion a tide of conflict and resistance that would haunt England for generations. The break with Rome divided families, tested loyalties, and sowed seeds of violence that would later explode into religious wars across Europe. Still, in Henry's mind, this turning point was necessary. He believed he was not only protecting his dynasty but also strengthening his kingdom. By seizing the wealth of monasteries, he filled the royal treasury. By appointing loyal church leaders, he ensured his authority stretched from the throne to the pulpit. And by creating a new church under his own supremacy, he reshaped the very identity of England. The human drama of this moment cannot be overlooked. Imagine standing in the crowd as monasteries closed, monks and nuns cast out, ancient libraries scattered, and the familiar rhythm of religious life replaced by the king's decrees. Some celebrated Henry's boldness, believing he was freeing England from corruption. Others wept for the loss of tradition, fearing that the soul of the nation was being torn apart. This was the decisive break, the turning point that marked Henry's transformation from Renaissance prince to revolutionary monarch. No longer the young man dazzled by tournaments and music, Henry now stood as a ruler hardened by conflict, willing to sacrifice peace for power, friendship for supremacy, and tradition for legacy. And yet, from this turning point also came the seeds of creation. In Oxford, Henry's vision began to take form in a new way. By refounding Cardinal College as Christ Church, he left behind not only the scars of destruction but also the gift of renewal, a place of learning that would endure for centuries. From the ashes of monasteries and the ruins of old faith rose something new, a college that would blend the authority of the crown with the pursuit of knowledge, shaping generations of scholars and leaders. Thus, the turning point was not only about division, but also about foundation. Out of conflict, Henry carved a legacy that would stand long after his reign ended. The storm had broken. But even greater conflicts still awaited Henry, conflicts of conscience, loyalty, and survival. The question now was how far he would go to secure his vision. The storm reached its fiercest point in the years following Henry's break with Rome. The king had chosen his path, but choices bring consequences, and his crown now carried the weight of resistance, rebellion, and betrayal. At the very center of this climax stood the sacrifices he demanded, from his people, his advisors, and even from himself. Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn had been his prize, the reward for years of struggle. At first, she seemed to embody his hopes, witty, ambitious, and determined to give him the son he craved. When she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, Henry's joy was tempered with disappointment, but he held fast to hope. Yet as the years passed, no son came. Tension mounted in the court, whispers spread, and Anne's enemies grew louder. Then came the blow that shook Henry to the core. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested on charges of adultery, treason, and even incest, charges most historians believe were exaggerated or fabricated by her rivals. Whether Henry truly believed in her guilt or simply saw her as a broken hope, the outcome was the same: and was executed at the Tower of London. Henry had sacrificed the woman for whom he had risked his crown and country. This moment revealed both the depth of Henry's conflict and the scale of his transformation. The man who once sought love and legacy now appeared consumed by fear of failure and obsession with control. Each wife who followed, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, carried with her both Henry's longing for stability and his ruthless willingness to sever bonds when they no longer served him. His marriages became symbols of his struggle, a search for security paid for by sacrifice. But the greatest sacrifices were not personal alone. Across the land, rebellion flared. In the north of England, thousands rose in what became known as the Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive uprising against the king's religious changes. Men and women marched under banners of the old faith, demanding the restoration of monasteries and the dismissal of the king's advisors. For a moment, the rebellion seemed so strong that it could threaten Henry's throne itself. Henry responded with a mixture of cunning and cruelty. He promised mercy, then delivered punishment. Leaders of the rebellion were executed, their bodies displayed as warnings. The message was clear: the king's will was absolute, and defiance would be crushed without pity. In these years, Henry's reign took on the tone of iron, decisive, unbending, and often merciless. Yet beneath the harshness, a paradox lived. The very choices that brought suffering also forged a new path for England. By cutting ties with Rome, Henry created the foundations of a national church. By seizing church lands, he reshaped the economic power of the crown. By founding Christ Church at Oxford, he ensured that his reign would not only be remembered for destruction but also for creation, for the support of learning, scholarship, and the training of future leaders. This was the climax of conflict, Henry standing at the center of fire, sacrificing love, friendship, tradition, and even peace itself in order to claim control of destiny. Was it ambition? Was it necessity? Was it pride? Perhaps it was all of these at once. What is certain is that Henry emerged from this crucible transformed, no longer the golden prince of his youth, but a hardened monarch who believed that his choices were not only his right but his sacred duty. And yet, this raises a question for us to reflect upon: how much would you sacrifice for the sake of a vision you believed was essential for the future? Would you risk love, friendship, or faith itself? For Henry, the answer was already written. He would pay any price. And by doing so, he ensured that his name, for better or worse, would echo through the ages. When the storm of conflict began to settle, Henry VIII stood not as the prince of promise he once had been, but as a king whose choices had reshaped his nation forever. Though his personal life remained troubled and often tragic, his reign left behind undeniable achievements that altered the destiny of England and the world. The most striking victory of Henry's rule was the creation of a truly independent English church. By making himself the supreme head of the Church of England, Henry achieved what no monarch before him had dared: he placed religious authority within the crown. This decision broke centuries of dependence on Rome and established a new sense of national sovereignty. Whatever one thinks of his motives, whether faith, pride, or dynastic fear, the result was a kingdom that began to chart its own course, spiritually and politically. Economically, Henry's dissolution of the monasteries flooded the crown with wealth. Lands once controlled by the church passed into the hands of nobles and gentry, creating a new class of power that tied its fortunes to the king. This redistribution strengthened the monarchy and reshaped the social fabric of England, pushing it toward a more modern state. But perhaps Henry's most enduring achievement, and the one closest to our story today, was his legacy in education and learning. At Oxford, the king transformed Cardinal College, originally founded by his fallen minister, Cardinal Wolsey, into Christ Church, a grand institution that combined a college with a cathedral. With this act, Henry ensured that Oxford remained not only a place of worship but also a place of discovery, scholarship, and leadership. Christ Church would go on to educate prime ministers, poets, philosophers, and scientists. It became one of the beating hearts of English intellectual life, carrying Henry's mark across the centuries. This act of creation stands as a powerful reminder that even in the midst of destruction, seeds of renewal can be planted. The same king who tore down monasteries and silenced dissent also gave birth to a legacy of knowledge and culture that still thrives today. Christ Church remains a living monument to Henry's paradoxical reign, a blend of harsh power and lasting vision. In the wider world, Henry also positioned England as a player on the European stage. Though his wars were costly and not always successful, they displayed England's ambition. His navy, expanded and strengthened, laid the foundation for the maritime power that would later carry England into an age of empire. Henry may not have seen that future, but his investments in ships and fortifications opened the way for it. By the end of his reign, Henry VIII was a very different man from the vibrant youth who had once dazzled the courts of Europe. Age, injury, and disappointment weighed heavily upon him. Yet his achievements were undeniable. He had secured the Tudor dynasty, given England a new religious identity, and left behind institutions that would shape not only his own time but also the centuries to come. For learners listening to this story, consider this: victory does not always arrive in the form of peace or joy. Sometimes it comes through conflict, sacrifice, and struggle. Henry's victories were complicated, shadowed by loss and cruelty, yet they carried forward a vision that reshaped his kingdom's destiny. And so, from the chaos of his reign emerged both triumph and tragedy, and a legacy that continues to inspire reflection on the power of choice, the price of ambition, and the strange ways in which greatness can be forged. When we look back at the life of Henry VIII, we see not only the drama of a king but also the profound lessons that history offers. His reign was filled with brilliance and brutality, triumph and tragedy. He broke with Rome, redefined monarchy, and founded Christ Church at Oxford, leaving behind both wounds and wonders. His legacy is a paradox. On one hand, he is remembered for cruelty, for 6 marriages, for executions, and fear. On the other, he is remembered for strength, vision, and for laying foundations that transformed England into a modern nation. Few rulers embody so clearly the duality of human ambition, the ability to destroy and to create, to wound and to heal, all in the same lifetime. Christ Church, Oxford, stands today as one of the clearest symbols of this paradox. Out of the ashes of Cardinal Wolsey's downfall and the dissolution of monasteries, Henry built something enduring. In its halls, future generations would study, question, and lead. The very place where he stamped his authority became a cradle of knowledge and inquiry. It is a reminder that even in times of conflict, seeds of learning and culture can flourish. The deeper lesson lies in Henry's transformation. He began as a golden prince, admired for charm and promise. He ended as a hardened monarch, scarred by conflict, yet determined to secure his vision. His story reminds us that greatness often comes with a cost. It asks us to consider, what sacrifices are we willing to make for what we believe is essential? And how can we ensure that the legacies we leave behind uplift rather than destroy? For English learners listening today, Henry's story offers more than history. It offers reflection. Every choice we make, no matter how small, shapes the story of our lives. And while we may never wear a crown, we each have the power to build legacies of our own, through kindness, resilience, and commitment to values that endure. Henry VIII reshaped the course of his nation. His life speaks across the centuries, not simply as a tale of kings and power, but as a mirror of the human spirit, full of conflict, capable of resilience, and always searching for meaning. And so, as we close his chapter, let us carry forward the lesson that even in the storms of life, we can plant seeds that grow into lasting legacies. Dear learners, we have reached the end of our journey through the life of King Henry VIII, a monarch who began as a radiant young prince and ended as a ruler whose choices shook the foundations of England. His story is one of ambition, struggle, sacrifice, and legacy. And while his reign is filled with contradictions, it also carries lessons that remain timeless. Henry once declared, "We are by the sufferance of God King of England." This statement reveals not only his sense of divine authority but also his deep belief that leadership carries responsibility. For us today, it is a reminder that every role we play, whether as leaders, learners, friends, or family members, carries weight. We too shape the lives around us by the choices we make. The story of Henry VIII encourages us to reflect. What legacy will we leave? Will it be one of fear and division, or one of growth and inspiration? Just as Christ's Church continues to shine centuries after Henry's time, we too can create works of value that endure beyond our own years. If you found this story meaningful, we invite you to share it with others. Carry Henry's lessons of resilience, transformation, and vision into your own life. And if you'd like to support our work, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to learners around the world. Until next time, keep learning, keep reflecting, and keep building your own legacy. This is WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Goodbye for now.